Yeah,
Let's
hello
focus.
everyone. Welcome to our webinar, How to Improve Your GMAT Score. I'm here today with Sergey Kouk, a senior trainer at GMAT Master. Sergey will share his own experience achieving a score of 750 after just 2 weeks of studying, so that's really impressive. And he will share his insights from working more than 10 years with prospective MBA students. Before starting and giving the word to Sergey, I just want to let you know that you can ask questions anytime during the webinar. You're very welcome to ask anything you want and participate actively. We are all set now, so I'm giving the floor to you, Sergey.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Nelly, and thanks everyone for joining today. I'd love to know where you're coming from and how much of the GMAT studies have you done. Today's seminar is about how to improve your GMAT score. That might mean that you already have a GMAT score that you'd like to improve. It might also mean that you're just starting out and you know that you are going to need to improve it. And that's why you want to learn some strategies. So let me know in the chat box, just so that I can understand a little bit more about where you guys are coming from. And just while you're doing this, let's set some expectations for today's seminar. So today's seminar is fairly short. We're going to have just under an hour together. I will tell you how we can connect more and how you can join even more of our seminars. But today, really, my goal is to give you an idea of how you can structure your studies. I'm also going to show you a couple of different strategies just to get you to understand a little bit better what is it that you're getting yourselves into and how is it that you can actually learn the strategies that are going to be a little more outside the box that hopefully are going to get you to score of 700 or more. So maybe let me know in the chat box, what is it that the score that you would like to get on the GMAT? And the scores are range from 200 to 800. So let me know. What is it, 650? Is it 700? Is it 750? And then my objective will again show you the plan, how you get there, because I want after today's seminar to leave you not just with a couple of strategies. Obviously, I cannot teach you everything related to the GMAT in 1 hour. I hope you understand that. So you're not going to be able to get a score of 700 as soon as you leave the seminar today. I hope we're on the same page, but at least you'll have a plan. And you won't just say, I got some interesting information. You'll say, well, now I know exactly what to do. So as Nelly said, I'm a senior trainer with GMAT Master, and I've done my own GMAT. I have my own MBA. In fact, I have 3 degrees. I have a Bachelor of Physics, a Master of Mathematics, and an MBA. So let me share with you how my test prep worked, and then we're going to break it down, and I'm going to show you what you can do, because obviously you might have a different background from me, so the preparation might work a little bit differently from you, but the overall plan, the overall structure should be around the same. So here's how my prep worked. When I decided that I want to do an MBA, the very first thing that I did is I went to mba.com and I found out what the test is all about and what's the structure of the test and what are the scores on the test. And of course, the scores on the test are between 200 and 800. 200 is the lowest score, 800 is the highest score, and this is the bell curve of the exam. That means that the average score is somewhere around, actually used to be around 500. Now it's somewhere around 550. And the higher you go, generally the much lower chance that you're going to get that score. So when I looked at this, I said, okay, well, this all sounds interesting, but where am I right now on this level? If I were to just go and do the test without any preparation, what score would I get? Right? Because for me to understand how can I improve my score, the very first thing I need to understand is where I am right now, how much of the improvement I need to make, that's first of all. And secondly, I need to start understanding what exactly I need to improve in order to get to my target. So I went ahead and took a practice test. Now, at the time when I did my GMAT, very few resources were available. I did my GMAT before things such as Facebook existed, right? I did mine in early 2000s. So there were very few resources available at that time. And pretty much the only resource that was available, widely available, was a practice test from MBA.com. So that's what I did. Took the first practice test and I got a score of 650. Now, of course, there are a lot more practice tests available. I'm going to share with you a software that you can take for free where you can get a little bit more insight into your score. So what did this tell me? Well, I got a score of 650. That meant that I'm getting pretty close to my target. But what was also very important is for me to understand what was the main contributor towards this score. And most importantly, what were some of the gaps that I still had that prevented me from getting a higher score? I wanted to get a score of 700 or more because I knew it's going to help me not only get into my school, it's going to help me with some scholarships, and it's also going to help me with my job applications. Because many of the firms, such as consulting firms and investment banks, are actually going to ask, what was your GMAT score? And many of them are going to specifically ask for the GMAT score you've used to apply to a business school. So if, let's say, you go to a business school and at some point you realize, well, geez, I was able to get it with a 650, but McKinsey asks for 720 or 710, I'm going to go and do the test again. While a lot of the consulting firms and a lot of these other companies would now specifically ask that you disclose your GMAT score that you used for the application, not any other GMAT score. Not everybody does that, but some of the companies do that. So make sure that you actually apply with the score that you want to use going forward. And of course, your scores are valid for 5 years, so you're still going to be able to share your score and even use it for the recruitment in case the company asks for it. So now, the score of 650 was pretty close to where I want to be. But what I also realized is that the reason why I didn't get a higher score is, for me, I felt pretty comfortable doing a lot of questions. But I was missing a lot of terminology. I was honestly comfortable with the strategies, but I was missing the foundations. I know it sounds weird. Most of the people are the opposite, but I was educated in a different language. So for me, I didn't even know what is an isosceles triangle. I just wasn't familiar with this terminology. So I had to go back and review it. And I reviewed it using the same resources as you can now find in the official GMAT guide. There's a summary of what's in the official guide also online. And the official guide, of course, has a lot more practice questions. There's a software from MBA.com that I've used that has fewer practice questions. I only had about 90 practice questions, but it also has a theory review. So I reviewed this theory, I took the next practice test, and I scored 700. So at that point, I realized, okay, so now I'm more comfortable with terminology. I did the review, I did some practice questions. I'm still comfortable with my strategies. So perhaps this is time for me to go and take my real test. And I did. And the score on my real test was 750. And the whole process from start to finish took me a whole of 2 weeks. Now, I know this sounds impressive, and honestly, I'm not saying this to impress you. It impresses me. Here's my official score report. As you could see, 750. I did my test back in 2002, and there was a 99th percentile score. So the reason why I was able to get that score is, again, for me, I got very clear about what exactly do I need to work on, right? For me, the strategies such as the process elimination, the dimensional analysis, the units digit strategies, all of these really cool strategies that you can learn as you are studying for the GMAT, I've learned these strategies at a very young age because I went to a school where I had just amazing teachers. And these teachers taught me really how to think outside the box. Like this was my math teacher, for example, in high school and the middle school, who was just such a gifted, talented teacher, who all of these strategies that we now learn on the GMAT, I've learned them when I was like 10 years old, right? But I've learned them in a different language. That's why I had to review. So I was very, very clear about exactly what I need to do. So how can you become much more clear? What is the plan? Let me give you a plan. And of course, this plan is going to be the same for everyone, but what exactly you will need to improve will be different. So here is the plan. the very first thing you want to know is, what is your starting score? Now, this is actually very, very important. And how you can find this out? Very easily. It doesn't cost you anything. It just takes about 3 hours of your time. And you can go and take a diagnostic test. Here's a website. This is our website here at AdmitMaster. We have this website specifically for a lot of our clients where they take diagnostic tests. And it's very simple. It's just trygmat.com. So very easy to remember. So you can go on this website. There's a quick form to fill out, and then you're going to be sent a link to a practice test, and you can take it anytime within the next 7 days, right, from the time that you actually click on the link. So you can do it now, even if you're not ready to take the test. Just get that link, and then when you're ready, click on that link, and you're going to have 7 days to take your test. So that's going to give you a lot of clarity. It'll give you, first of all, a chance to experience what the GMAT is like. And I know it's okay to look at a couple of questions, but I'm going to show this to you in a moment, that doing a couple of questions is not the same as doing a 3.5 hour long exam. It is actually quite different, because the timing on the exam is quite stressful and the questions are adaptive. So there's a lot more to the test than just doing the questions. That's why just experiencing this is a really, really good idea. Now, when I speak with a lot of people and I do a lot of one-on-one consultations, I usually do like 5 to 10 consultations per day. If you can go on our website, admitmaster.com, there's a button to book your consultation. So there are a lot of people I'm speaking with. In fact, I spoke in my 12-year career with over 25,000 people. I know that sounds crazy, right? But I've just tallied my numbers, and I've noticed that many people that I speak with them originally are somewhat afraid to take a diagnostic test. They say, well, I haven't studied yet, so I'm probably going to score badly. Well, and I'm always trying to convince them and encourage them to take a practice test, and almost always I'm successful. And one of the reasons why I really strongly suggest that you take this diagnostic test is that initially when you begin studying, you are going to be confused, because there's so many different strategies that you can learn. And even if you take our course, many of the strategies we're going to teach you are going to be not the strategies that you already know and if you ever used. They're going to be some of the more advanced strategies. And at first, you're going to be a little less comfortable using them. Eventually, they're going to get you to 700 or more. But at first, like, okay, well, geez, should I solve this problem using the algebraic equation, or should I actually maybe use this process elimination that I learned at AdmitMaster? So that's why initially your score is actually going to go down, and then eventually it's going to go up. That's why it's really important that you take this diagnostic now before you begin studying. And then the second step is you need to understand, what is your target score? Okay, so imagine I took a diagnostic test and, imagine I scored, let's say 500. The average score of students who come to our course are about 490, right? So even below 500. And I'm going to actually tell you what this means in a moment. Now, the second thing you want to know is, what's my target score? Now, how do I actually know what's my target score? And again, when I speak with a lot of people, they would say my target score is as high as possible, right? Or 800, or 750. And my response is usually, well, this is kind of like saying, I want to be fit. I want to get into a good shape. And therefore, I'm going to go and train how to be an Olympic athlete. Right? That's what it means. To get a score of 800 is kind of like training to become an Olympic athlete. Only about 25 people a year worldwide get a score of 800. And 24 out of these 25 people are GMAT instructors, right? So basically, don't try at home, right? So you got to be realistic, but also you want to be ambitious. So a good way to understand your target score is to benchmark your target score against the averages at your dream school. Now, what I mean by the averages, and not just an average, is that there are many different averages you might want to look into. Now, of course, the GMAT is just one of the averages. So imagine you're applying to a business school, and let's say the average is 650 at that business school. Well, you might also look at the average GPA at that school, and maybe it's something like 3.5. You might also look at the work experience, and maybe at that school, it's like 5.5 years. So maybe you realize, well, geez, my GPA is maybe 3.0 and I only have 2 years of experience. So my averages there are lower, therefore my average in the GMAT should be higher. So 650 might not be enough. I might need to target 690 or 700. So that's how you define your target score. And if you have multiple schools where you want to apply to, then of course you want to choose the more ambitious school, the dream school, and then try to benchmark yourself against that school. Now, of course, if there's any sort of a minimum score that you require, for example, certain schools will offer scholarships based on a certain minimum score. Like, for example, there's a school in France who would say, if you reach that score, you automatically get this much in a scholarship. Well, then in this case, you should say, well, that's my minimum score, right? I can't really go below it. Or let's say you're targeting applying to McKinsey and you know that McKinsey requires, let's say, a minimum of 700 to 710, for example. If you've done your research and then you'll say, well, I need a minimum of 710, right? So that's your target score. All right, so now that you know your starting score and your target score, now you have a gap. And now your job is to figure out how to close the gap. I'll work with a coach to figure that out. And there are going to be a couple of things that you'll need to understand. The first thing is, how much time do I have to prepare? And the time I have to prepare actually consists of two components. Component number one is, what's my deadline? Now, let me give you a hint. The longer the deadline, the less stressful the preparation is going to be. A lot of people who are targeting top business schools in the world will give themselves about a year to prepare for the GMAT and prepare their application. Now, you have to be kind of somewhat careful with the deadlines to make sure you meet the deadlines. But there's also another factor, and that is, how many hours can you dedicate per week? Now, here, you need to be honest with yourself. If you are working full-time, you probably cannot do more than 20 hours a week. Otherwise, you're going to be really tired and your return on investment is going to be very low because you're going to be all stressed out and you'll just burn out. So you have to be realistic. We recommend that if you're on a tight timeline, if you're working full-time, that you try to allocate up to 20 hours a week. And if you're taking classes, that should include your time in class, not just time for the homework. So you got to be realistic. Now, you may have heard, if you've been on any GMAT forums, that there are many people, especially in certain parts of the world, that will take a year off work to study for the GMAT. This is very common among certain groups of people, certain parts of the world. It's kind of somewhat a little bit in a culture. Now, let me caution you against doing this for a couple of reasons. Reason number one, the business schools pay very close attention to your work history. They're going to look at your resume, they're going to look at your LinkedIn profile, and of course, they're going to interview you. Business schools generally do not look favorably at people quitting their job to study for the GMAT, because that just tells them that the person might not be as good as multitasking, at managing their priorities. And honestly, a business school studies are intensive. I've done my MBA in early 2000s, and I can tell you, it was nothing compared to my science degree. It was not that hard. It was not that difficult to understand, because I've done some particle physics. It's a lot more challenging than reading a financial statement. But the amount of workload was crazy. When I did my physics degree, I was working part-time, probably about 20, 25 hours a week. When I did my MBA, I couldn't work part-time at all. I started working part-time, then I quit my part-time job. This is impossible. My MBA was a full-time and a lot more, because there's just so much work to do. That's why the business schools want to look for people who can work full-time and also study for the GMAT. So that's one reason why you probably should not quit your job for a year. The second reason is that there is a huge opportunity cost if you quit your job for a year. I mean, even if you make, let's say you're in North America and you're making an average of about 70,000 pre-MBA, Well, that's $70,000 lost, plus your living expenses, plus everything else. And that might also potentially mean that you're going to delay your MBA for another year. There are lots and lots of really amazing GMAT programs available. We offer one here at Admit Master that are a lot more affordable, because nowhere close to $70,000. And of course, they will help you prepare a lot quicker. So that's why be careful with this, but be realistic. For many people to improve by 10 points, will need somewhere between 20 to 30 hours of studying. That's kind of an average that tends to be an average. So if you need to improve 100 points, you should budget about 200 to 300 hours of studying. 200 points, about 400 to 600 hours of studying. Now, you could study, of course, a lot more efficiently. If you learn the good strategies, you have a good coach, you could cut this time down in 2 to 3 times. A lot of our clients will spend about 10 hours or 100 hours for every, 10 hours for every 10 points. So 100 hours for 100 points, 200 hours for 200 points. So a lot more efficient, and there are different ways to make this more efficient, right? And I'll show you actually how we usually structure the studies for our students, so that you can see, if you cannot join us, you can use the same model to structure your studies so that you can work a lot more efficiently. So what's your strategy? And when you are trying to understand how am I going to improve, and when you put all of this together, and we also look honestly and answer this question, what sort of a level of prep can I afford? Can I come to a group class, which will be efficient, but also cost effective? Can I work with the private instructor, but then that instructor experienced? How often can I meet with this instructor? Or do I just want to get a lot of resources and study on my own, knowing that if I get stuck, it'll probably take me a lot more time to figure out the answer, but I'm on a very, very strict budget, so maybe I can't afford to work with a very experienced instructor, right? So then maybe, again, be honest with yourself and look at this as an investment as opposed to just a cost. So speaking about the starting scores, I said, we'll talk a little bit about what does a starting score mean and how to actually get to my target. So let's talk about your starting scores. Imagine you take a practice test and you score below 400. What does this really mean? Well, what this means is that you might be missing many foundational concepts from high school. So by foundational concepts, I mean, you might not remember why multiplying an inequality by a negative number will result in flipping of a sign. Now, that's what I mean. Or you might not know And if you score somewhere between 400 and 500, that just means that you have some gaps in your foundations, but you're also beginning to demonstrate some critical thinking. You're not just looking at the question, getting all frozen, but you actually start thinking, okay, so what can I do here? How can I maybe get to the answer, maybe without doing all the calculations? Right, so that's a score of 400 to 500, but you still have some gaps that you need to close. Then let's get to higher score. Let's imagine you're scoring somewhere between 500 and 600 on the diagnostic test. What this means is that you're comfortable with most of the foundations, and you also have some general strategies. But for the most part, you're still approaching the questions the way you would do them in high school. So most people would be stuck somewhere around 500 to 600. If they've reviewed their foundations, if they're pretty comfortable with the problem and they look at the problem and they're saying, okay, I kind of know how to do it, they do the problem, they'll get somewhere between 500 and 600. Let me show you an example of exactly what I mean. So here's an example. Here's the question. This is a question from a real past exam. The question says, Aaron will jog from home at X miles an hour and then walk back home by the same route at Y miles an hour. How many miles from home can Aaron jog so that he spends a total of T hours jogging and walking? All right, well, super clear, right? The person is, maybe there's a lockdown and the person is leaving home, is jogging at one speed, gets tired, turns around, goes home at a different speed. And he was away for 3 hours. So the question was, how far did he go? Well, let's look at the answer choices. Let's maybe see if the answer choices help us. When I show this question to many of my clients in a live class, I usually hear a really big gasp for air, saying, oh my gosh, how do I do this question? The answer choices are very, very complicated, and they make the question even more confusing. So what do most people do? Well, a lot of the people are just going to freeze and not know what to do. But if we're comfortable with the foundations, here's what we're going to do. We're going to say, okay, I know, because that's something we learn in school, that distance is equal to rate times time. So we're given two speeds, speed x and speed y, and we also know the time. The problem, unfortunately, is we're given the total time, but two separate distances. And that's what makes this question a little more challenging. So how could we use this one time but two different speeds? Well, perhaps one of the things that we need to do is actually just break these things down. So we can say that there's a distance from home and there's a distance back home. The times together are t. So now we have t1 and t2. If we add them up, we're going to get a t. We were also told that he was going back by the same route. That means the distances are the same. And that means that we can build a couple of equations. We could start isolating things out. And at this point, what I've noticed is that many people after spending about 5 minutes, they'll say, well, okay, let me look at the explanation at the back of the book, because I'm kind of lost. And I know it's probably possible to solve this problem, but I know the math is going to be probably a little more complicated. So let me see how I can do this. Let me make sure that I can understand how the book does that. That's what a lot of people do, and that's why they generally get to about 500 to 600. So what could you do to get to much higher scores? What could you do to get to a score of, let's say, 700? Now, let me show you a different strategy. Let's go with the mastery way as opposed to the theory way. So here's what we can do. Oh, somebody's saying E. Oh, okay, let's see. We'll get to this in a moment. So here's what we can do. We can say, okay, let's try to understand this problem a little more conceptually. What do we normally do to find the distance? Well, we multiply speed by time, right? So when we multiply speed by time, it's kind of common sense. I might even not remember the formula, but I know that I just need to multiply speed by time. For example, if I'm driving, let's say from, I'm in Toronto. So if I'm driving from, let's say, Toronto to Montreal, and I'm driving at 100 kilometers an hour on a highway, and it takes me 6 hours, I know the distance is 600. Everybody knows that, right? Every driver knows that. And I know the distance is not going to be something like 106, right? It would never occur to me to add speed and time because they measure different things, right? Now let's look at the answer choices. If we pay attention, we would notice that answer choice B is trying to add speed and time, x plus t. I can't really add speed and time because, that's illegal. I multiply speed and time, so B is going to be out. Now, are there any other answer choices where the GMAT is going to try to add speed and time? Well, how about D, x plus y plus t? How about E, y plus t? So for these reasons, we can eliminate 3 answer choices right away because they're doing something that's not permitted, adding speed and time, right? We never add speed and time. So now I'm down to 2 answer choices, A and C. I want to be lazy. I don't have to look at both of them. This is a multiple choice exam, so only one of them could work. So let me take a look at the answer choice A because it looks a little simpler. And if it's correct, then that's perfect. And if it's not correct, then it has to be a different answer choice. So A, here's what A gives us. Miles an hour, X, divided by miles an hour, Y. That cancels out the units. and now what's left is hours. So A gives us hours, but we need miles. And therefore the answer choice has to be C. If you have an engineering background, that's what's called dimensional analysis. If you don't have an engineering background, that's what's called common sense. And also just knowing how to use the strategies. And by the way, just for full disclosure, you can do this in 30 seconds. And notice how much math have we done. We haven't really done a lot of math here. We haven't honestly done almost any math, and that means that the chance of us of making a math mistake is pretty much zero. So in terms of our target score, what is it that we need to learn to get to a certain score? So if your target is somewhere between 500 and 600, here's what you need. You need to have a good foundational knowledge. So you got to know the distance is equal to rate times time. You got to know how to add speeds. Then if two cars are moving in the same direction, you need to add their speeds or subtract their speeds. And if they're moving in different directions, you have to add their speeds. So things like that. You also need to understand the different types of questions. You got to understand the process elimination, strategies such as picking numbers. But if you want a higher score, somewhere like 600 to 650, you need to learn some more specific strategies for different types of questions. You also got to practice a lot more so you can develop the confidence in using these questions or these strategies. So these specific strategies that I've shown you right now, this is a strategy that's called dimensional analysis. So it's a very good strategy for this specific type of a question. You might also need to know, for example, that if the cars are moving in different directions, that you got to add their speeds, or you can draw a graph, right? So there's some very specific strategies. Well, what about if I want to get 650 to 700? Well, in that case, I need to dig deeper. I need to not just know the strategies, I need to actually understand why the strategies work. And I need to understand also various traps. And I also got to practice a lot more. Usually to get to a higher score, I got to practice more. But practice doesn't always make perfect. I'm going to get to this in a moment. And finally, if I want to get a score of 700, I really need to learn how to approach the questions a lot more strategically. I need to not just know the strategies, I need to be able to anticipate the traps. I need to look at the question and say, what is the GMAT trying to do to trick me? Because then I could actually use the GMAT tricks against the GMAT. And there are going to be lots of examples where you can do this. And also need to be able to recognize some patterns and sometimes some hidden patterns, especially, for example, in the verbal questions. And I really need to learn how to think like a CEO. That's what we call this here at Admit Masters, thinking like a CEO, because this is thinking on a different level. Now, by the way, why don't we ask what the GMAT says? The GMAT, by the way, this is an organization that makes tests. Here's the quote from the GMAT. Rather than testing your knowledge, okay, this is actually very, very important. See, the GMAT is saying we're not there to test your knowledge of business or something else, even though most of the tests that we've ever done, we're testing our knowledge. And most of the tests we've done in high school and university were subject matter exams, a physics exam, or a biology exam, or a history exam. They're all subject matter exams. The GMAT is not. The GMAT is an exam that measures our higher order reasoning skills, because these are the skills that are really important for us to be successful as managers in the management classrooms in the 21st century workplace. So we need to have a basic understanding of some knowledge, some foundational knowledge. That's why we covered this already, but we really need to demonstrate our reasoning skills. And that's exactly what you just saw in a question with Aaron. And even if you look at the structure of the test, you would notice that in the names of the sections, the GMAT gives us clues on what we're going to need to do. The GMAT uses words such as analytical and words such as reasoning. Now, a lot of people, when they look at the structure of the test, they're going to say there's a math section and there's an English section. I hear this a lot. I don't honestly know where it's coming from, because there is no such thing as the English section. No GMAT book ever mentions this section as an English section. Now, yes, this is a test in an English language, but this is called the verbal reasoning section. And even the math section is called the quantitative reasoning section. So as you've noticed, we've used some reasoning, but we haven't really used a lot of math in the question with Aaron. And that's going to be the case in a lot of questions. So if you're thinking like this is something we're going to use just sparingly sometimes, well, of course, the dimensional analysis is something we're going to use on certain questions, but it's sort of an approach where we really just think about the question and try to be a little more creative and try to get to the answer without doing a lot of math. This is something you're going to be using on probably about at least 80 to 90% of the questions. There's only maybe going to be like 10 to 20% where you really have to do some hardcore math. A lot less than what most people think. Now, there's an important thing to also understand about the GMAT is that this is a computer adaptive test. So the quant and the verbal sections are computer adaptive. What this means is the test adapts to your performance. It gets easier or harder depending on how you do. Now, this is what makes the test more challenging. That's why I mentioned that taking a practice test and really seeing how the test works, and also taking a practice test that's adaptive. So the test on trygmat.com, that's our test, it is adaptive. It's a software that also does the same thing as a real test. It makes the questions harder or easier depending on how you do. But if you want to get a high score, this means that you are going to get a lot of hard questions. That's how you get a high score. So that means that you need to be prepared to deal with a lot of hard questions. And by the way, you don't get more time to deal with hard questions. So you got to also be ready to know how to manage your time properly. Now, speaking about managing your time, when I speak with a lot of the people who come to us for a consultation, I hear a lot a phrase such as, I know how to do the questions, I just need to learn how to do them faster. Well, I've just shown you an example. What would it take to do the question faster? Would I need to learn how to do a lot of calculations faster and probably make a mistake? Or should I learn how to get the question done in a lot fewer steps? Just like what we've seen in the mastery option where we did some dimensional analysis. I think you can see that it's the latter. It's something where we just need to learn a different approach that gets us to the answer faster. We don't necessarily need to learn how to do all the calculations faster because that usually doesn't work. Now, so far we spoke a lot about quant, but let's take a look at the verbal question as well. So here's the question. What I would actually like to do, just to make this a little more interactive, I would like to give you 1.5 minutes, because that's what typically you get for the sentence correction question. And then just once you know what you think, what you know what the answer is, just throw it in the chat box. I see some questions in the Q&A box, so I'm going to be responding to them in the meantime as well. But please do this question. You have 1.5 minutes and let me know what the answer is. And then of course, I'll explain how to do this question. All right, so that's been 1.5 minutes, but does anybody want to share the answer in the chat box? What do you think is the answer? It doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. Wow, looks like a challenging question, right? So what a lot of people do here is they kind of look at this question and say, okay, what makes the most sense? What sounds the best? Okay, I see some C's, some B's, and some A's. Okay, well, what a lot of people do is they say, okay, well, maybe there are multiple sloths here in the Central South America. What kind of sounds better? So C says sloths use their long rubbery limbs to hang from trees, sleep 15 hours a day, and move so infrequently that 2 species of algae grow in its coat and between its toes. Okay, that kind of sounds good. Maybe A sounds good as well. Somebody's saying, yeah, it's definitely B. Well, let's take a look at what's going on here. We have 3 answer choices that use sloths and 2 answer choices that say the sloths. Now, the difference, of course, is sloths are multiple sloths, and the sloth is either one sloth or one species of the sloth. We don't really know whether they refer to a specific animal or they refer to the species. Doesn't really matter. In both cases, it would be singular, and in A, B, and C, it would be plural. So our job is to understand whether we need to use a plural subject sloth or the singular subject the sloth. One of the ways to do this is to get any sort of a keyword or any sort of another word that will help us understand whether we need to use plural or singular. And one of the ways to do this is to look at verbs, but another way to look at this is to look at pronouns. And the pronoun here at the end that was used is the pronoun its coat and its toes. Now, just for the record, its is singular, right? When we refer to somebody's, and in this case, it's an animal, so we cannot say he or she, we have to use it. Well, it is one. And therefore, A, B, and C are automatically wrong. I don't even have to read them. I don't have to understand them. I don't have to feel them. I don't have to see how they sound. I know they're wrong because the pronoun its is non-underlined. That means it's correct. Therefore, I must use the sloth. So now I'm down to 2 answer choices. See, and I've done this literally in 15 seconds because I didn't have to read all of the answer choices. I just had to look at what's the difference between them and pay attention to the words that are very important, which in this case was the pronoun, because the pronouns and the verbs are the only ways for me to break the tie between the singular and plural. So now that I understand that it's singular, the next thing that I need to do is look for anything else that might be going on there. Well, if I look at D and E, the first part before the comma is the same, but the second part is different. The first part is saying sleeping and moving so infrequently. E says hangs, sleeps, and it moves. Now, a lot of people at this point are going to choose E because they've learned some rules. And one of the rules is that if you have a list in a sentence, then the elements of this list should be parallel. That means they should use the same grammatical form. And that's why E seems correct, but nevertheless, D is the right answer and E is wrong. And it only counts if we get the right answer. And the reason why D is correct and E is wrong, most importantly, why E is wrong, is that E places the pronoun it in the place where it doesn't belong. If we say the sloth hangs, sleeps, and moves, why would we say the sloth hangs, sleeps, and it moves? This actually violates the parallel structure. This pronoun should not be there, and therefore E is incorrect and D is correct. So what was important there? It was important for us to, first of all, work very quickly, very efficiently, because we have an average of about a minute to minute and a half for these sort of questions. And also we needed to know exactly what to pay attention to, and we had to be very comfortable with the strategy. By the way, this example was an example from the verbal reasoning section. And in the verbal reasoning section, you're actually going to have 3 different types of questions: sentence correction, critical reasoning, and reading comprehension. And critical reasoning and reading comprehension will have a lot more things to read. That's why you have to be very efficient with timing. Now, by the way, if you want to learn more about these different types of questions, and if you actually want to learn a lot more strategies, then come and join us. We have free classes. And there's a 2-hour class on the verbal section alone, and there's a 2-hour class on the quantitative section alone. And the classes are going to be on December 14th and December 20th. You can sign up at admitmaster.com. So What I think you see by now is that really the difference between getting a low score and getting a high score, and one of the reasons of how I can actually get a higher score is I need to start focusing on things that are a little bit different from what a lot of people focus on. What a lot of people focus on when they prepare for the GMAT, they focus on getting more knowledge. But we need to start focusing on getting more skills, because the GMAT tells us it's about the higher order reasoning skill. So I'm going to give you the structure of your plan, and feel free to take some notes. And then I know there are some questions that are really excellent questions that I wanted to answer live. So then I'm going to be able to answer your questions. So I want to use an analogy of driving a car. What a lot of people do is they gain knowledge by simply reading a textbook on driving a car, right? Like a handbook. But if I want to learn how to be very good at driving a car, maybe I want to go and ride a Formula One car, I need to develop this skill. So how do I actually do this? How do I master this game? How do I develop these skills? Well, here's my step number one. My step one is, if I want to learn a new skill, a new sport, driving a car, or the GMAT, first, I gotta know the theory. I gotta know the rules of the game. That is why here at Admit Master, if you come to our class, the first thing we're gonna do is we're actually going to fit you up with a mini course on the theory that you'll be taking before you even come to our class. What you're gonna do is you're gonna review some basic theory, and most importantly, you're going to be doing a lot of practice in the adaptive online exercises, where you're going to be doing things such as, well, find the pronoun in a sentence, add fractions, calculate an area of a right triangle, and things like that. Convert from a fraction to a decimal, because this is the foundation. You can't really do complicated GMAT questions if you're not able to add two fractions together, or if you're not able to take a reciprocal of a fraction, or estimate the square root of a two-digit integer. So that's the first step. What's the second step? Well, again, using the same analogy with driving a car, the second step was to actually get in the car. Now, usually got in a car with someone because there's some regulations about it. Now, the GMAT is not the same, of course, that you cannot, crush your GMAT. You could potentially give up on your career if you don't do things properly. But what's really important is that you take the time to learn the skills. So how can you do this? Again, depending on your budget and depending on your level of comfort, you can either come to a class, you can study one-on-one, or you can study using the self-prep resources. But what's really important is that you learn the best strategies that work upfront. That's why you don't just get into a car and try to drive around and crash a few cars and kind of see what works. No, you got to learn how to do it first. Then you try it out. And ideally, you want to get some feedback. That's why if you can afford it, coming to a class or doing some one-on-one training is better, because it will give you an opportunity to get feedback. And for example, here at Admit Master, our classes are fairly small, and right now they're virtual, but usually in a class of about 10 to 15 people, everybody is on a webcam, it's very interactive. So you can actually ask a lot of questions, get a lot of feedback in the class and also outside of a class, because the instructor knows you really well and can actually see you. So this is very, very important, right? Learning these strategies up front is very important. That's why when a lot of people study for the GMAT, they will go and just do a bunch of practice questions. But that just means that they are potentially developing a lot of bad habits. But learning what works first, trying it out, recognizing you'll make some mistakes at first, and ideally getting some feedback, and eventually learning how to coach yourself is also very important. That's what we teach at Admit Master here throughout our 6-week program, is how you can actually look at the question, how are you able to recognize your own mistakes? And it's very, very important how you can improve them, because the instructor won't always be there with you. So you need to be able to coach yourself as well. And finally, of course, step number 3 is, once you've taken that class with the instructor next to you, then you just need to go and drive a lot. That's why in many of the countries and states and provinces, you need to go through what's called the graduated licensing, which means that first you get a license of the first level, then you drive maybe for a year, and then you get the next license. that gives you an opportunity, for example, to drive with more passengers or drive on a highway. And the reason why we do this is that because when you're practicing a lot, you're developing habits. And you may have heard practice makes perfect. It's actually not true. Practice makes a habit. The more you practice something, the more habits you're going to develop. So what habits are you developing? If you're practicing strategies that work, if you're practicing strategies that some of the strategies that I've shown you, and you practice them more, you get more and more comfortable with them, you are getting more comfortable with what really works. And that's why you're going to get better and better. If we're just simply practicing doing questions, but we're not improving, that just means we might be developing bad habits, or we might not be developing at all. That's why it's really important to practice a lot. Right? Practice is really, really important, but practice has to come after you've learned the foundations first, step one, and after you've learned the strategies, step two. Now, a lot of people, when they approach the GMAT, don't really approach it the way that it's supposed to be, and which is a skills-based exam, just like a driving test or like a sport. So that's why the statistics are not in our favor. Let me show you some statistics from the GMAT. 7 million people a year explore the GMAT prep. So they're going to go on the MBA.com or some of the other websites that are maintained by MBA.com, like GMAT.com and so on. Of these people, 2 million people create an account on MBA.com, and of them, only 10% will actually end up ever doing the test. So 90% of people who either buy a GMAT prep book or download the GMAT prep software will read it, will do a few questions, we won't see an improvement, and actually will give up. And of those 200,000 people, only 12% will actually end up getting a score of 700. So that's a chance of 1 in 300. If you look at how many people get a score of 700 or more, compared to how many people just woke up one day and thought, it's a really good idea to do the GMAT, let me go and actually check out GMAT.com, it's 1 in 300. Not a very good chance. One of the reasons is that they don't have the right structure or they don't learn the right strategies. But if you do, you can totally get a score of 700. Let me give you a couple of really quick stories. So here's Daria. She came, she did the diagnostic test. We always suggest when you come to a class, you got to do a diagnostic test, right? So she scored 380 and said, I need a lot of improvement. Many people at this point are going to be discouraged. She was motivated. And notice in her comments after the course, she actually said, I learned how to think outside the box. I learned how to manage my time and stress. I learned how to think like a CEO. So this is very, very important. Somebody was asking a question. Do you have any tips on how to deal with time pressure? Absolutely. The way to deal with time pressure is, number one, we need to learn how to do the questions more efficiently. And that means learn the strategies that will help you get to the right answer quicker. Now, at first, when you use these strategies, you might not be able to do this, but eventually you're going to get more and more comfortable. So using this structure that I've shown you, develop your foundations first, learn the strategies, and practice, you're going to get so comfortable doing the questions, then you won't feel that much time pressure. You'll know that you've practiced enough and you have the right amount of time. If your strategies are inefficient, then you're always going to feel time pressure because it always takes you more time than it should. So the key to doing questions quicker is to do less to get to the right answer, not to do things faster, but to do less, right? And that requires, again, some confidence, requires a lot of structure. Let me show you one other really quick example. Now, some of you are saying, okay, well, 3 months, 380 to 700, that's amazing. What if I need a bigger improvement? Or what if I cannot dedicate as much time during the week? Can I study and just get a really high score? Maybe if I give myself a little bit more time. So here's an example that hopefully is going to inspire you as well. Pion is a nurse in the emergency room. And she came to our class. She had to take some time off just to come to our class because her schedule was completely crazy. And she took about 9 months from a pretty low base. It was somewhere around 400 to get the score of 760. And the reason why she was able to do this is she followed the same structure. Just it took her longer, but she still followed it. Right? Before she came to our class, she took the time. She was very dedicated, went through the mini foundational course, came to the class, did her homework, and then practiced, but stayed very focused on what she practiced and asked for help, asked for coaching. All right, so as long as you follow the structure, whether you give yourself more time because you're more busy, or you give yourself less time because you can allocate a lot of time during the week, maybe you're not working right now, maybe you're between the jobs, then you can get that score as long as you follow that structure. In fact, we keep track of the success of our students here at Admit Master, and we see that the skills-based approach leads to higher scores. The average score here at Admit Master is 670, and about a third of our students will get scores of 700 or more. So that just tells you that the approach plays a lot into your success. It's not about having a certain background. It's not like all engineers should get higher scores. It doesn't really work that way, because otherwise there'll be only engineers at the business school, and that's not the case. Managers are not always engineers. They have engineers working for them, right? But sometimes if you have if you have a certain specific subject matter expertise and also a management skill, then that might help as well. So again, in terms of what training option works for you, obviously working live with an instructor is usually a slightly bigger investment. Investing in a self-prep program is a smaller investment, but takes more time. You can actually go to admitmaster.com/access if you're interested to see what options we offer here at Admit Master. We're a medium-sized company, so we care a lot about your success. That's why you can reach out and you can ask for help. You can ask for a consultation. We'll help you figure things out. Maybe if you already use some resources, we can help you understand how you can continue using them in a little bit more efficient way. They're no bad questions, so please reach out if you decide to join us. We'd love to have you. We really put a lot into our program. For example, our program includes 3 tutoring hours, includes free course retakes if you take our live course. So that's a lot more than you usually get at a lot of other companies. So again, just check it out at admitmaster.com/access. And there's actually something really interesting you can find on that page. First of all, you can find the schedule of our classes. You can also find the demos of our self-prep program. So you can actually try it out. You can see what it's like. You could try it for 7 days and see, okay, maybe I like that option. You can also find the schedule of our refresher classes. These classes that I mentioned, the 2-hour quant and verbal classes. The next one's on December 14th. That's the verbal class. You can find the link to the practice test. That's at trygmat.com. And most importantly, it's a holiday season. Ladies and gentlemen, that means it's time for gift giving. We're going to give you a lot of these things for free, but if you'd like, you can actually enter to win a free course. At this page, admitmaster.com/access, there's going to be a button to win a free course. You just need to fill out a quick form, and to qualify for this free course, we're going to ask you for only one thing. And that one thing is you need to take a practice test before the deadline, and the deadline is December 26th. If you take a practice test, you're going to be entered into a draw. If you don't take a practice test by this timeline, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to participate. That's how we really want to see that you are serious about doing this. We are going to give this course for free. So by taking this practice test, you're already going to improve your chance of winning so much. We've done a draw recently back in November, and we had a lot of people sign up, but at the end, only 3 people took a practice test. Only 3 people took it seriously. Well, guess what? One of them won the course. So the chance was 1 in 3. So by just simply demonstrating, yes, I'm serious about this journey, you already have a much, much, much higher chance of winning. And we had like over 100 people who signed up, right? So sign up at this admitmaster.com/access. We're going to email you a link to take a practice test, and you have the next 3 weeks to take it. Now, if you've already taken a practice test somewhere else, or you've taken a real test, just take a screenshot and send it to us. That's going to be okay as well. So that's what you can find there on these pages. Now, I have a couple of questions here that I also wanted to make sure we get to. And if you have any questions, please throw them in a Q&A box. We have the next 10 minutes for the Q&A as well. If you have to leave us, because I know the time is 11 right now, Eastern time, then I look forward to seeing you there, and just make sure you sign up for this free draw. It's a free course, and it's the course where we're going to teach you the same things that I've shown you here today, but we're going to teach you all of everything related to the GMAT for all of the different types of questions. even for the essay and even for integrated reasoning. Now, here's a question here from Ben, and that is, I want to ask you how you can choose which test to sit, GMAT or GRE, because many schools accept both. So this is a very, very interesting question and a very important question, because many schools right now would recognize that a lot of people, when they decide to go to a graduate school, that's sometimes if you want to improve your career, you can go one of two routes. You can either become a very good specialist. Let's say you want to become a specialist in chemistry or engineering, or you become a generalist, in which case you will become a manager. Now, both could lead to high salaries and a lot of career satisfaction. So a generalist degree is typically an MBA, and a specialist degree is typically some sort of a master's degree. So the GRE is an exam that was originally designed to be an academic exam, which simply demonstrates whether you have the academic capacity to succeed in a master's program, without any sort of a specific reference to the master's program. So it could be Master of Geography, or it could be Masters of Computer Engineering. Whereas the GMAT was specifically designed for the business schools only. So even though the schools will accept both, you have to maybe ask yourself two questions. First of all, which test would the school prefer? And second is, which test do I have the better chance of succeeding on? Maybe you've already done the GRE, so you can maybe use your GRE score to apply to a business school. Or maybe if you take a practice test, you realize you score a lot higher on the GRE, and therefore you need like a week to prepare, whereas the GMAT is an exam that is a little more tricky. It's going to take me a lot more time to prepare. So maybe I'm just going to use the GRE. But if you take a practice test and you score kind of approximately the same on the GMAT and GRE, then my advice would be, if you're applying for an MBA program, if this is your top choice, do the GMAT. But if you are applying to multiple programs, including maybe Master of Engineering, the GMAT is not going to help. So then do the GRE only, and then maybe use it to apply to a business school. Now, do recognize that the GMAT has certain advantages when you're applying to the business school. And one of the advantages is that the business schools understand the GMAT a lot better. They typically consider the GMAT as an exam that's more suitable for the business school. So if you have two people with exactly the same backgrounds, exactly the same experience, which I know never happens, but imagine, and exactly the same GPA and everything else, and one of them took the GMAT and one of them took the GRE, and the school has only one spot, they're going to offer that spot to somebody who did the GMAT. Because first of all, the GMAT tests skills that are a little more relevant to the business school. So they know that this person has a higher chance of succeeding in the business school. Secondly, the school will know that the person who did the GMAT is very serious about doing the MBA. Somebody who did the GRE, they might think that this person is still considering other options, like maybe some other masters. And the MBA typically tends to be a little bit more expensive. Typically, it's 2 years as opposed to a year. So the school will have less confidence that if they offer the seat to the person with the GRE, that the person will actually come to the school. That's how the schools think. So in this hypothetical scenario, if there are two exactly the same people, one with the GMAT and one with the GRE, the school will very likely offer the only seat left to the person with the GMAT. So what's your top choice? And of course, take a look at what do you think is going to be easier for you based on your practice test results. If you heard that the GMAT is easier, or you heard that the GRE is easier, please don't believe those rumors. Both of the exams are very competitive. Both of the exams are bell curved. And in fact, there are about 3 times more people take the GRE than people who take the GMAT. And a lot of people take the GRE for some very specialized masters as well, and some very competitive masters. So the GRE is not easier, and it is not less competitive. Certainly not. Just if you already score a lot higher on GRE, you just might have the skills that are a little more tailored towards the GRE. So if it's suitable for your application, then please, by all means, go ahead and do it. But of all things being equal, for an MBA, the GMAT would be a better option. Here's one more question. What difficulties or traps test takers should avoid when they prepare for the GMAT or GRE? All right, so this is a question that I could probably spend 10 seconds answering, and I can probably spend 10 days answering this question, because there's a lot of different traps that they should avoid. But one of the most important traps and one of the most important difficulties, and that is that, especially for the GMAT, this is not an academic test. This is not a test where we just need to read a book and learn a lot of theory and then just go and do the test. So for that reason, the way we're going to prepare for the test is going to be very different. That's why one of the biggest traps that many people fall into is they do the questions, they read the explanations, and they say, okay, I got it. Let's move on. And then they see that their progress is very, very slow. What they will do at that time is they'll say, let me go and Google this question. Let me see what other people think. And sometimes if we do that, there's so many different opinions of what's a better way. And everybody is different. Everybody has different backgrounds. And a lot of people who are doing this are still trying to figure out what would work better. So they don't always necessarily share the best advice. That's why this takes a really long time, and that's why a lot of people give up. So that's why one of the biggest traps is to start doing just a bunch of questions and figure things out as you go along. And the alternative suggestion would be to really just take things one step at a time. Learn the foundations first, right? And you can do this many different ways. We here at Admit Master will give you a mini course that you're going to go through, so you don't have to go and figure out exactly what you need to learn. We're going to tell you the exact topics you need to cover from high school, and we'll give you a resource where you're going to do this. So that's step one, foundation. Step two, learn the strategies. Whether you come to a live class, you have a friend who can help you, or use a really good self-prep resource like our GMAT Express course, doesn't really matter. Whatever you're more comfortable with, whatever your budget allows, but learning these strategies first is really, really important. That's going to help you avoid falling into this trap by developing a lot of bad habits. So learn these strategies and then practice. And as you're practicing, make sure that you very consciously apply the strategies that you've learned in class. This is very, very important. Because if you learn a new strategy and you go back and just start using all of the old strategies, of course, you're reinforcing the bad habits. And at first, when you're trying to apply these new strategies, you might not be as time efficient. That's okay. The timing will come as long as you're using good strategies. Timing will come later. In fact, at first, when you're using these strategies, you say, well, it takes me double the time that I just can solve the problem. Well, what you realize is solving a problem now takes you 3 minutes, and you can't really cut this down this time anymore. But using a more strategic approach maybe takes you 5 minutes, because it took you the first 4.5 minutes to figure out what's the strategy to use. But once you know this, then it takes you 30 seconds. So, on the day of the test, you're going to be a lot more efficient with time. Well, ladies and gentlemen, our time today has come to a close.